Today we're going to be covering how you can apply your powder coating. So after you've properly removed any coating on the surface and then prepped that surface with a proper profile, whether that's through a sandblasting process and mechanically prepping or through some sort of chemical etching treatment process, once you've properly prepped the surface, you can go ahead and then proceed to potentially begin to apply your powder. If you're concerned that there might be any gases trapped in your product, it's advised and recommended that you may consider outgassing your surface prior to applying your powder. That generally requires you to bring your temperature of an oven to a low bake and then briefly bake the part so that anything that might be trapped, whether it's an oil under the surface or any sort of other contaminant that you want to make sure comes to the surface, is properly able to be driven out of this before you apply your powder. Otherwise, you'll see issues like fisheye or contaminants in the surface when you're done. So to understand how to powder coat, we'll show you the settings on this equipment. While this is industrial equipment, it's a Wagner unit, which is a significant investment compared to kind of a budget gun that may be a few $100s. The general principles will apply. When it comes to powder coating guns, you have a kV setting and a microamp setting, and then depending on the equipment, you may not have microamps. So on industrial equipment, you'll have kVs, microamps, and then your powder to air mix ratio, and then you also have how fast is power adjusting based on how close you get to a surface. Generally, I won't mess with how fast the power adjusts as I get to the surface. When it comes to kVs and microamps, if you only are able to control kVs, high kVs allow for maximum wrap, and then they also allow for use of multiple coatings. So for multiple coats, if you have only control your kVs, you generally want to start a little bit higher in the 70 plus range if you have a 100 kV unit, or in the 50 kV range if your unit only goes up to 50. After your first coat, you would then back the kVs down, and the reason you want a lower kV on the second pass is because the charge can tend to accumulate on the surface and create a problem called back ionization, which looks like star pops in the surface, and that's usually because there's so much charge building that it then causes the powder to improperly charge and creates the starburst effect that you'll see. So on a first coat, if you have flat areas, generally a high kV and a relatively high microamp setting will work. That'll allow you to get the most wrap out of your powder. So 100 kVs or 80 kVs is great for a first coat pass. If you have difficult areas, a lot of corners, you generally want to reduce your kVs and potentially limit your microamps if your unit allows for that. Most units will come with presets, but generally for tricky areas and corners, your kVs would be in the 50s or 40s if you have a 100 kV unit, or maybe in the 25 to 30 range with a 50 kV unit. The microamps you could limit around 20, so you'd set it around 20, and what that'll allow for is if you're getting, as you move in and out of closeness to the surface, that'll slowly drop your kVs so that you're not getting issues with back ionization or an excessive charge developing between you and the surface. Some other key points when you're ready to powder coat, you want to make sure your equipment is independently grounded. So a lot of people will use the grounding strap from your equipment. This is actually meant to keep the equipment grounded itself so that the powder charge is the only thing getting charged, and then your surface will be independently grounded with a strong grounding rod. You can get a grounding tester if you're concerned whether or not your ground is sufficient, and that will allow you to determine if you're getting good ground. Without good ground, you'll lose powder transfer efficiency. A lot of times you'll have issues with back ionization, and you won't be able to do two coats because you aren't being able to ground that surface after you get powder on it. So we've tested our ground here before. This isn't a perfect ground. A perfect ground would be into the earth with a 14 gauge line on it, but this is at least a similar or close enough option as an alternative. This is a booth that is secured to the earth, and when we've tested, we've gotten good ground out of it. So I go ahead and ground my part, and then as I've said, my unit is grounded. You want to use your gun with a bare hand typically, or at least keep your palm free. This allows for you to be also a source of grounding, because ultimately what we want is nothing to get charged but the powder, and then that powder, which is negatively charged, is going to seek the nearest thing that's grounded. In this case, if we're aiming at our surface, it would be the target. So this product, as you see, has a lot of nooks and crannies to it, especially on the back side. And so because of that, I will want to go ahead and set my unit on a Faraday's type setting, which again is about a 50 kV type setting. Some of the other important things, if you can control powder to air mix, generally speaking, as you go along in the Faraday areas, or you're trying to deal with second coat applications, you're going to drop the amount of powder in the air if your unit allows for that. So you'll be closer in the 50 range rather than the 60 or 70 range. And so we'll go to the Faraday setting. This does have a preset. My KVs are set here around 60, and my microamps are limited around 40. So that's going to allow me to get those tough areas without creating issues with powder not getting in the corner. I'll show you that, since that's kind of the trickiest part. Like I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and get started on powder coating. A couple quick notes. You do want to make sure the gun has been completely cleaned out if you have any powder in there from a previous job. If you have a full box feed unit, you usually will have a purge button on the unit if it's industrial, or if it's a little lower grade equipment like that wouldn't have the purge button, you can just use an airline. And you generally want to blow out the gun so that you know that no powder is left, so I know it's completely clear. If it's a box feed unit, you can use a earplug in the line and blow that through by removing the line, and that will make sure to purge the unit of any residual. It can also be a good practice to briefly hit the surface of your product with a cleaner potentially. If you didn't do that, if you just blasted it, you may want to make sure to blow it down with air and then potentially wipe it with solvent, though dipping is generally better than wiping, as it'll leave less chance of dragging something across the surface. So that's how some proper steps, and we'll go ahead and get started powder coating. All right, you see the corners here. As you're powder coating, generally if you don't have the ability to independently control KVs and microamps, with Faraday areas, you're generally going to be best to back away from the surface slightly. Similar with second coats, you'll want to generally back away a little further. That allows some time for the charge to reduce before it gets there, so that it is better able to go into the corners and better able to apply that second coat for second coat applications. So remember, keep the KVs down when you're recoating or Faraday, and keep your distance a little further, especially if you don't have full control of microamps and KVs and the gun doesn't automatically adjust the two, which is what's going to be the case if you have a gun that's sort of a budget or starter gun and isn't a Wagner or an industrial. Generally, an industrial gun is going to be a few $1,000s to get started. So we'll go ahead and show you here, a couple inches away. Obviously, you can control your fan pattern here, depending on what your goal is. And then you just briefly pass over the target. The higher the KV, my better my wrap, but because of my corners, I have to keep the KV down so that I can get powder in there. Obviously, some of the challenges you'll often find are how you properly position or posture and fixture your parts so that you can get all the areas while still maintaining a ground. So my problem area, it would be the corner there, which I'd have to come back and hit briefly prior to being ready for this to be baked. But as you can see, that's the front, the back of it, and then you can come in here. With the unit like this, I've hit most of my front, so I'm relatively set, and then I can briefly hit it a little more. You can hear, because I don't have my ground on, ultimately you'll generally want to hit the whole part prior to hitting the spot where your grounding cable touched, so that it is not building excessive charge, and then you'll have less issues with back ionization. So this is some of the basics of how you shoot your powder coating, so that you don't get issues like back ionization. You cover your surface effectively, especially in Faraday cage or second coat applications. Sometimes if you have issues on your second coat as well, another trick that you can do is to begin to heat the first coat so that it is slightly beginning to liquefy, and then you can shoot the powder on a hot first coat, and then we call that a hot flock application. That can sometimes help with second coats. Generally, if you're doing a lot of second coats, investing in industrial equipment will make that process a lot smoother and a lot easier. There's just a lot of limitations that you have, not being able to control KVs and microamps, as well as powder to air mix. So long term, that's an ideal solution. One other quick key point: when you're changing powders and in between coats, you always want to make sure everything has been completely cleaned out in between. If you have a box feed unit, you can do that by using the purge button. My unit has a purge button on the top here where it blows air out until that is clear. Then you can also take a air line and blow air through each airline hose that goes to the unit for the powder feed, and you can even take a small earplug and blow that through the line so that any residual is removed. With this little cup gun, you can just do this until you notice that there's no more air with powder coming out of it. This is a little bit about how you properly use a powder coating gun and apply powder coating. If you have questions or troubles with your particular powder coating, leave them in the comments below, and thank you for watching.